Hello guys, welcome again. In this lesson, we will be talking about foreign exchange rates. So we will be talking about how they are determined and the causes and consequences of exchange rate changes are explored in this lesson. We will be explaining floating and fixed exchange rate systems. We will also be analyzing how the foreign exchange rate is determined in something called the foreign exchange market. We would be talking about some new terms called appreciation and depreciation of a currency against others. And we will see how the consequences of foreign exchange rate fluctuates on export and import prices. And finally, we would be talking about the advantages and disadvantages of a foreign exchange rate and a fixed exchange rate system. To see how exchange rates are used, we need to talk about something called trade. And trade was explained in previous lessons. Trade, it includes both the exports and the imports. What do we mean by exports? Exports is the sale of goods and services from your country to other countries. So since I'm selling other countries, it means my country will be receiving money. So this would create something called cash inflow. I am receiving cash. Whereas imports, on the other hand, it is the purchase or when my country buys goods and services from another country. So in other words, since we are buying from other countries, it means we are paying them money. So this would create something called cash outflow. Now, definitely you've heard of the term exchange rate, but what does it mean? Every country has its own national currency. And the amount you get in return for your own currency is called our exchange rate. Now, where do we exchange our currency or the money that we have to get another currency? We do that in something called a foreign exchange market. So a foreign exchange market is a place where payments for imports and exports are done. And as we said, imports is when we buy goods and services from another country, and exports is when we sell goods and services to other countries. Now, when we are dealing with trade, which includes both imports and exports, you need to know that this requires the exchange of different national currencies. Now, I need you to think of that the exchange rate is nothing more than a price. That is the price of one currency in terms of another currency. And so we can analyze it with the tools of supply and demand. So because it's a price, remember, we will analyze it using the tools of supply and demand of currencies. Let's see what the term investment means. It is doing something today which will generate some return in the future. So, for example, it could be when we buy shares in the ownership of overseas companies, invests in premises and equipment to start and run business operations in other countries. So, for example, I buy a building in order to start my own company, or it could be buying machinery or capital. All of this is investment. I am expecting a return. So when I'm talking about international trade, it requires the exchange of foreign currencies. So let's have a look at these examples. Here, I am talking about an Indian company which uses French advertising company. So the Indian company has to use the French advertising company. So he has to exchange his Indian rupees to euros. In the second example, I am talking about an Italian which is investing in an Argentinian shipping company. So he has to exchange his euros to the Argentinian pesos. In the third example, I am talking about a UK tourist that takes holiday in the USA. So he's traveling to the USA, so he has to exchange his UK pounds for US dollars. So as a summary, payments for imports and exports and for all other international transactions requires the exchange of national currencies. This takes place on the global foreign exchange market. Let's see why there is an international demand for a currency such as the US dollar and why the US dollars are supplied. I will start off by the why do we demand US dollars? First of all, let's say I want to import goods from the USA. I would have to pay them in dollars. The second reason would be maybe a US-owned multinational firm. It has locations in other countries and they want to send their profits back to the US head offices or headquarters. Third reason, overseas firms located inside the USA and they want to pay the workers that are working in that company. They would have to pay them in the local currency, which is dollars in that case. Let's say I would want to save my money. I live in Abu Dhabi and I want to save my money in the US banks because they are offering me high interest rates. The second one would be currency speculators, people that are forecasting what would happen to currencies. They say that the US dollar will appreciate. So you would see people exchanging their own currency to US dollars. People and firms overseas, they want to buy shares in US companies. I want to invest in a US company. So I would have to pay in dollars. Let's say I'm a US citizen working in Abu Dhabi and I want to send money to my family back home in the USA. I would have to exchange my dirhams to dollars. Foreign-owned banks provide loans to US firms. Another reason would be overseas governments want to hold reserves of US dollars to settle international payment deficits. Overseas companies buy dollars to invest in businesses, properties, equipment, and other assets inside the USA. Finally, overseas governments lend money to the US government. So all of these are reasons why you would want to demand a certain currency. In this example, it was why would we demand US dollars? If I was talking about, for example, Lebanon, then why would we demand the Lebanese lira? It would be the same reasons, but instead of saying in the USA, it would be in Lebanon. Now let's see why the US dollars will be supplied. So please have a look at the first one. US consumers want to buy and import goods and services produced in other countries. The second one, so here, as you can see, it's a US owned. Here it would be a foreign owned multinational firm with locations in the USA will exchange dollars for their own national currencies in order for the profits. And then US firms located in other countries will pay their overseas workers in their local currencies. So if you would like, please pause the video and have a look at these reasons here. Okay, when will the US dollar be supplied? So for example, the US government lends money to overseas governments. They will lend them in the dollar, US dollar. What determines the exchange rate of a currency? First of all, you gotta know, we said before, where we exchange currencies, it happens in something called the foreign exchange market, or I can call it Forex. Now, Forex is the world's largest financial market. It consists of all those people, organizations, and even governments willing and able to buy or sell national currencies. So let's have a look at the market demand and supply for US dollars. So Brazil, they sell goods and services to the USA. The USA will have to buy these products in the real. So what happens is the USA would buy the real with their US dollars. Okay? USA buys the Brazilian reals and the Brazil sells the reals to the USA. Let's have a look at it graphically. So here I would be talking about the price of dollars in reals, and here the quantity of dollars traded per period. I'm talking about the demand and supply of the US dollars. So according to my graph here, you have to know that the $1 is equal to 2 reals. This is my equilibrium point. If Brazilian consumer imports a car from a US manufacturer priced at $20,000, the equilibrium price in Brazil will be 40,000 reals. So this equilibrium, it's called the equilibrium market price of one national currency in terms of another. You are always comparing currencies against each other, and this is what we call the exchange rate. Now I have to define something called a floating exchange rate, and this, it could be, I'm talking about appreciation of a currency, and it is where the increase of demand of that particular currency, or I would be talking about a depreciation of a currency, which means there is an increase in supply of it. What do we mean by floating exchange rate? Exchange rates are determined by the global demand for their currencies and their global supply. Changes in the demand for and a supply of a national currency will therefore cause its exchange rate to fluctuate over time. So it depends on what we are doing. A floating exchange rate is also known as a fluctuating or a flexible exchange rate. What does that mean? This is a type of exchange rate system in which a currency's value is allowed to fluctuate, which means increase or decrease in response to the market forces of demand and supply of a certain currency. Now, in many countries, even with floating currencies, central banks often participate in markets to attempt to influence the value of the floating exchange rates. And this, we took it previously when I was explaining monetary policy. Let's see how an appreciation happens. As we said before, it means I am talking about an increase of demand for a certain currency. So at that point, you gotta know when a currency is appreciating, the importer gains and the exporter loses. So why does it appreciate? When a domestic exporting firm that earned foreign currency is exchanging for its local currency. When foreign tourists visit the country. When foreign investors wish to make direct investments in the country. Also, when citizens working abroad, they send money to their home country. When the interest rate in the country rises, more foreigners invest in the country. When speculators buying local currencies. When multinational companies wish to set up the business in the country itself. And when central banks buys local currency. We already explained that before when I was talking about the demand for US dollars. Let's have a look at the graph here. So again, price of dollars in reals and the quantity of dollars traded per period. This is before it was my original equilibrium point. It was $1. It was equivalent to 2 reals. So this was my original equilibrium point. After the appreciation of the dollars, what happened is I had a new equilibrium. Every 2.5 reals were equal to $1. So now the Brazilian consumer has to pay 2.5 reals in order to get $1. 2.5 reals to get $1. طب what if he wants to exchange $20,000? What will happen here? You cross multiply, which is 50,000 reals instead of 40,000 real. So he has to exchange more reals in order to get the same amount of money when the real depreciated against the dollars, or the US dollar appreciated against the real. Let's talk about a depreciation in the exchange rate. As we said before, it means we are talking about an increase in supply of that currency. Why does a currency depreciate? It is when a domestic importing firm need foreign currency to pay for their imports, or when domestic tourists visit other countries, or when domestic investors wish to make direct investments in another country, or when foreign citizens working in the country send money to their home country, or when the interest rate in the country decreases so people would want to save their money, or when speculators sell local currency, or when the central bank sells local currency. So at that point, the importer loses and the exporter is the one that gains. So here it is better to, let's have a look at the graph. So they're telling us depreciation in the dollar following an increase in supply of the currency. So as you can see, there was an increase in supply of the dollar. Here it is better to buy cars from the US because 1.8 reals equal to $1. If it was $20,000, let's see how much they need to exchange. Cross multiply, 36,000 reals, and so it is the new price of the car, and it is much better than exchanging 40,000 reals in order to get the $20,000 car. Now, let us talk in details about what is the difference between something called a floating and a fixed exchange rate. We will be explaining the difference between managed or dirty floating and fixed exchange rate system. When I am talking about the managed or dirty floating, you got to understand that it is when the government will either, so it's the government will either buy or sell its own currency. This is the main reason why governments keep something called reserves of gold and different currencies. When I am talking about a fixed exchange rate system, here the government or the central bank are acting on the government's behalf. So they will intervene by buying or selling its own currency, not different currency here, in order to keep the value of its currency the same or close to a desired exchange rate target. So they wanted fixed. Why do you think governments would want their currency to be fixed? I would like you to think about it. First, because this gives something called certainty to the people. Okay? And this is part of what we took before, which is the monetary policy. So in a floating exchange rate system, there is always an appreciation in the exchange rate if the exchange rate is rising against other currencies. So we are demanding more of that particular currency. In return, there is a depreciation of the exchange rate if its value is falling against other currencies or its supply is increasing. In other words, it means no one is demanding it. So floating exchange rate systems, the value of a currency is determined by something called market forces, which means I am talking about the demand of the currency and also the supply of the currency. So for example, overseas tourists, they buy, or I would say that they would demand the foreign currency by selling their domestic currency. So for instance, if I travel to any European country and I am living in the United Arab Emirates, I will be selling my dirhams in order to buy or demand more euros. Countries that adopt this system allow the value of their currency to be determined by the demand and supply of the currency itself. Okay, if banks offer investors high interest rates, so here, for example, because I'm talking about the New Zealand, if banks in New Zealand offer investors higher interest rates than those in the UK, let's say, this can cause investors to take advantage by buying the New Zealand currency. This will increase the demand of the New Zealand currency, which means it will be shifting its demand from D1 to D2. This raises the price of the exchange rate from 0.55 to 0.65. So let us have a look at the advantages and disadvantages of floating exchange rates. I will start off by the advantages. Here, the government can freely use its fiscal and monetary policies to achieve any of the macroeconomic goals that they want. Governments do not keep very high foreign exchange rate reserves. Okay, no need of regular central bank intervention, so they keep things flowing the way they are in the market, and many times balance of payments are auto-corrected in this system because under the system countries are more insulated from other countries' macroeconomic problems. Now, the disadvantages of having floating exchange rates is there might be high fluctuations in the currency market, and this can cause a significant dent in the profits of importers and exporters. And also, the foreign investments may be adversely affected due to high fluctuations. Whereas in a fixed exchange rate system, there is a revaluation of the exchange rate if it is rising against other currencies. And also the exchange rate is devalued under a fixed exchange rate system if the value of the currency falls against other currencies. There is a graph here. Again, you are always comparing two currencies. So a fixed exchange rate, you might be seeing it sometimes as something called a pegged exchange rate. And it is a type of exchange rate regime in which a currency's value is fixed by a monetary authority against the value of another currency. So there comes a new law from the central bank that they make sure that the price of this currency is that much in terms of the US dollars. So the government here is interfering in the foreign exchange market so that the currency's exchange rate is different from what the free market would have produced. It established a peg for its currency. In this policy, the central bank sets a fixed and unchanging value for the exchange rate. For example, right now, there is a deep economic problem occurring in Lebanon, where if I want to talk about the black market exchange rate system of the Lebanese lira against the dollars, it would be today 45,000 Lebanese lira. It is equivalent to $1. Now, this is an insane rate. So the government sometimes what they will be doing, even though it would still be high, they will use something called a fixed exchange rate, where they will say every 15,000 Lebanese lira will be equivalent to $1. So under this system, again, the government, why are they interfering? It is because they want to maintain its exchange rate at a predetermined level. Okay, so here the HKD is for Hong Kong dollar. It has been fixed against the US dollar since 1972. Okay, and it has been pegged to both the USD at the rate of every 7.8 Hong Kong dollar would be equivalent to $1. So every HKD 7.8 would be equal to 1 US dollar. The main advantage of a fixing exchange rate is that it introduces uncertainties. So again, if I want to go back to that example, here every day this rate is changing, it's fluctuating. People don't trust their own currency. The Lebanese people don't trust their own currency at all. So when the government is doing something called a fixed exchange rate, it will be better. It will remove these uncertainties that the people are having. And this will allow firms, both foreign and domestic, to be certain about future costs and prices, thereby encouraging international trade and exchange to occur again. What are the advantages? So please have a look at these advantages and disadvantages. We already explained them, so you can pause the video and write them down on your copybooks. What is exchange rate speculation? So for instance, here I'm having a speculator is the person that is forecasting what might happen to the exchange rate. So here the rate was $1 was equal to 2 euros. So if he sells $1,000 for 2,000 euros, he will be receiving 2,000 euros. The speculator at that point, let's say he is thinking that the dollar will be falling in value. So if the dollar is falling in value, it means the $1 will not get me 2 euros anymore. It will be getting me 1.6 euros. So that if I want to sell the 2,000 euros, which was worth $1,000 before, what will happen is I will sell the $2,000 for 1,250. So in other words, it is a success. I've made a profit of $250 from the same amount. So the $1, how do I calculate it? Is 1.6 euros. The 2,000 euros, how much will it get me? You cross multiply, you will be getting $1,250. This tells us that this is depreciation. So if we are thinking that the dollar is falling in value, you will be making the $1,250 profit. Now, changes in the exchange rates, it will affect the product prices. So we are either talking about depreciation or appreciation. Let's have a look at this photo. Here I'm talking about US export price is $10,000 and the Egyptian price would be 60,000 pounds. So here the exchange rate in the first image would be $1 is equal to 6 Egyptian pounds. Okay? However, what happens is if the exchange rate changes here and the $1 becomes 8 Egyptian pounds, I would say that the dollar appreciated at that point. And here they gave us the rate. Okay, at that point, for me as an Egyptian citizen, for instance, and I want to import a car from the USA, where will it be cheaper for me? It will be cheaper for me in 1 June because I would be paying in Egypt only 60,000 pounds for it. However, if I wait for 10,000 for 10 June, when the dollar became £8, I would end up paying more for the price of the car. Okay, so you gotta know an appreciation in the exchange rate of a currency will make imports to that country cheaper, but will increase the price of its exports in overseas market. And this is the example. Here I'm talking about the price of the imports. What so here we will be talking about the causes of foreign exchange rate fluctuations. What makes 1 month, for example, the $1 is equal to 6 Egyptian pounds. The second month it became 8 Egyptian pounds, then it became 10, then it became 8. What made this fluctuation, the ups and downs? First of all, we have 7 reasons. The first reason would be changes in demand for exports. How can I explain this? Here I will be talking about an increase in the demand for exports, perhaps due to, for example, improved quality or successful advertisement will also increase the demand for the country's currency. Therefore, this would increase the exchange rate. The second reason would be changes in demand for imports. So, for instance, an increase in the demand for imports, perhaps due to an increase in competitiveness of foreign firms, this will raise the value of the foreign currency in order to facilitate the purchase of foreign goods and services. The third reason would be inflation. Inflation, as we know it, it is an increase in the price of goods and services caused by domestic inflation. This will tend to decrease the demand for exports because we will end up paying much, much more. So this will therefore tend to cause the exchange rate to fall in value. Changes in interest rates, which is a monetary policy. So if the interest rate falls relative to those in other countries, so people will move their savings to bank overseas and vice versa. Speculation, it's when foreign exchange traders and investment companies move money around the world to take advantage of higher interest rates and variations in exchange rates to earn a profit. Huge sums of money here are involved, and this can cause exchange rate to fluctuate, at least in the short term. Speculators might also lack confidence in certain economies, and therefore, for instance, they might withdraw their investments, and this would lead to depreciation of the currency. The sixth reason would be the entry or departure of multinational companies. So, do we have new multinational companies opening in our country, or are they shutting down and moving elsewhere? This is no, when I'm talking about multinational companies, I will denote it by something called foreign direct investment, which I can denote it by FDI. And this is part of globalization and the economic activity of multinational companies. It means the investment in overseas production plants requires the use of foreign currencies. So let's talk about an example would be Nissan's car manufacturing plant in India. It requires a Japanese car maker to buy Indian rupees in order to pay for the materials, labor, and other production costs. So this is considered inward foreign direct investment, and at that point they will be demanding more rupees, and on the contrary, outward foreign direct investment will increase the supply of the currency. The seventh one would be known as government intervention. So all of the above factors, all of the first six that we explained, can affect the exchange rate under something called a floating exchange rate system that we explained it before. A government intervention in the foreign exchange market can affect the exchange rate. So, for example, if greater demand for American goods causes an appreciation of the dollar, the US Federal Reserve can sell its dollar reserves, therefore increasing the supply of dollars, leading to a fall in the value of its currency. Also, the Chinese government, they might limit the currency flows by only allowing individuals to change up to 20,000 yen, okay, on a daily basis. So the central bank would make up this decision in order, again, to either increase the supply or decrease the supply of its own currency, depending on what they want to achieve. So this is a summary, what causes the exchange rate to fluctuate. Here it's written and explained, so you can pause the video and have a look at it, please. Now let us see what are the consequences of foreign exchange rate fluctuations. Let's talk about the effects of an appreciation in the exchange rate of a currency. Here, for example, we'd be talking about the Egyptian firms that are exporting goods to the US. So if I have a rate where the one Egyptian pound is $0.20, which is 20 cents, and if I have the Egyptian pounds at $0.40, here at that point, I would say that the Egyptian pounds is the one appreciating against the dollars. So for example here, if the Egyptian goods are priced at 100 Egyptian pounds, it means they will be selling it at $20 in the US. Now, in this second scenario, what happens is at the same time, the same items that were priced at 100 Egyptian pounds, each will now cost $40 to buy in the US. Remember, the Egyptian firms are the one exporting to the US. So this means that the US are the ones importing from Egypt. So when their currency is depreciating, and I'm talking about the dollar here, it will make imports more expensive. So at that point, I would say that there is an appreciation in the value of the Egyptian pound against the US dollar. And I can also say that the Egyptian pound value has increased against the US dollars. And finally, I can say that the Egyptian pound will now cost the US residents more to buy on the foreign exchange markets, making imports more expensive. Okay? Now let's see what are the effects of a depreciation in the exchange rate of a currency. So, for instance, here there is a company based in Tehran. It is one of Iran's leading exporters of pistachio nuts, and each month they send around 4,000 tons to Germany. Its exports compete internationally with pistachio nuts exported from the US and Turkey. So here we have something called international competitiveness. Now, in return, if they are exporting the nuts to Germany, it means Germany is the one importing the pistachio nuts from Iran. Okay, and they are a major importer of pistachios to sell to food processing companies and retail outlets all over Europe. Now, to pay the nuts it imports from Iran, it needs to exchange its euro to the Iranian rials. So, Iran sells pistachios to Germany. Germany pays with Iranian rials. Iran sells Iranian rials on the foreign exchange market, and Germany will be buying the Iranian rials with the euros that they have. Thank you so much. Please, if you have any question, don't forget to write it down in the comment section, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Have a nice day.